Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Selena Zhang. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships here at the Canadian Urban Institute. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's mobilization session for the Healthy Communities Initiative, which is all about how to write a successful funding application with tips for first-time applicants. This was one of the most, if not the most popular mobilization session in the first round. And again, we had lots of interest this time around as well, with over 500 people signing up. So hello to everyone from across the country. I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleagues from ICLEI Canada, the wonderful Eva and Megan. I'm grateful to CFC, the Community Foundations of Canada, who are our partner leading this program with us, as well as all of our other program partners, 880 Cities, SEDNet, Mars, the National Association of Friendship Centers, Park People, Vivonville, J. Pitter Placemaking, and the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities. Today, I'm calling in from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. As I was reflecting on this land acknowledgement today, I was thinking about this moment that we're in, this moment among many moments of reckoning for Canada as relates to residential schools, Indigenous peoples, our histories of broken treaties, a nation we're all in and share that is shaped by colonialism, that is shaped by atrocities committed against Indigenous folks historically and leading all the way up to our current day. And our role as community members, as city builders, as professionals, as practitioners to always think about as a daily practice when we step forward and when we step back, when we use resources, when we cede resources to Indigenous placemakers who are working in and with their communities, how we focus on not being extractive in our consultations and our program making, and the ways that we continue to, on a daily basis, put into practice reconciliation is more than just a word, but something that requires us to make that commitment every day that flows between our professional and our personal lives. And to always think about the resilience that's emerging from Indigenous communities as well. We had an absolutely fabulous mobilization session 2 weeks ago, run by our colleague Shadi from the National Association of Friendship Centers, and he was talking all about all the different ways that Indigenous communities have come together and been resilient around the different kinds of placemaking programs that have emerged across the country during the pandemic. And that session, as well as all of the other mobilization sessions, and eventually this session too in the days to come, are available on the Healthy Communities Initiative website. So be sure to check that out. I see people are already saying hi in the chat box. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to do so. And when you do, tell us about where you're from, and also toggle that switch on the bottom of your screen from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, because that way everybody in the room can see you. And I see some people are doing this as well. If you know the Indigenous land that you're on, feel free to make a land acknowledgement in the chat box as well. Feel free to make as much use of the chat as you wish throughout today's session. We do have staff who are going to be manning the chat, specifically looking out for your questions, questions about the program. And so do feel free to pop those in there. We'll be incorporating your questions later into this session. And if we're not able to, in real time, answer your specific question about your specific project, what we will do at the staff level is send you the email of the help desk that you can reach out to discuss the specific details of your ask. A couple more things you should know. The session is available in English and French, so you can toggle at the bottom of your screen. And the session today will also be recorded, as I mentioned before, so feel free to pop onto the CFC website in the coming days and send it along to other people who weren't able to join the session. if you really enjoyed today, which I'm sure you will. So before I pass it on to Eva, let me just tell you a little bit about the Healthy Communities Initiative. For those that are unfamiliar, this is a $31 million investment from the Government of Canada to support local efforts to adapt public spaces during COVID-19. We have funding available between $5,000 and $250,000. And this second round of granting closes in just a few short weeks on June 25th at 5 p.m. PST. The first round of this program was highly competitive, really, really popular. We received over 3,000 requests totaling more than $360 million. And we've already granted to over 250 initiatives, and a map of all of the initiatives that were already funded is available on the Healthy Communities Initiative website. So whether you are indeed applying for the first time or resubmitting an application for the second time, we hope this mobilization session, as well as the other mobilization sessions, will support you as you're crafting your proposal and learning about all of the inspiring things that are happening from coast to coast to coast. And so with that, thanks everybody, and I'm going to pass it on to Eva to take it away from here.
Thank you, Selena, so much for the introduction and for information about the fund. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly here, and hopefully the PowerPoint will come up at some point, so you're not looking at my clustered desktop. There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I, too, am in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of many nations, and I thank the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples for the care that they provide to the land upon which I have the privilege of living and working. So with that, I think we'll start our session now. And we've given it a little bit of a pithy title. You know, I have a great idea. Now, how do I turn it into a proposal? And that's really what we'd like to zero in on. You likely all have wonderful, important, innovative, and beneficial ideas. And the key is to work together to translate that good and important idea into a successful proposal. One of the things when thinking about this, we really zeroed in on is that you only have one chance to present your idea through a written proposal format. So you have to make sure that you utilize that opportunity as much as possible. In today's session, we're going to present 5 building blocks of a successful proposal. And those 5 are relevance, results and outcomes, planning and design, partnerships and collaboration, and sustainability, or the long-term vision of your project. I'll dive into a bit of detail in that, and we'll then move from that broad strokes overview into some of the specifics of how to put together a proposal and get it submitted. Please keep in mind, though, that in general, with any funding calls, the funding agency assesses all of the proposals on a comparative basis. So your proposal is evaluated against the other proposals that are received within that same funding category, within that same call. And really, the ultimate piece you need to remember is that your ability to explain your project idea with specific reference to how it relates to the fund that you're applying for is the most crucial piece. In most competitive funding processes, just meeting the criteria doesn't automatically guarantee that a project will receive funding. As I had said, these are highly competitive processes. I think a good example is in the first round of this fund, over 3,000 proposals were received. And so your ability to demonstrate that your project idea at its best, in its most perfect light, and showing how it meets all the building blocks that we're going to talk about is your best bet for being successful at the proposal stage. Selena talked about some housekeeping, but just to quickly reiterate, simultaneous translation, you can access that with the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, the chat function for questions in either English or French, and either myself, Megan, or Rupal at the end will be happy to try our best to respond, and the recordings of this session will be made available as well. So getting into those first building blocks, relevance. There is no lack of good project ideas, and there generally is a variety of sources to get these ideas funded. The catch is to match a good idea and an innovative idea with the right funding source. And so what do I mean by right in this context? You need to think about a few things. The mandate of the fund to which you're applying. Your proposal must contribute to the mandate or the objective that the fund is trying to achieve. To what degree does your project idea directly help achieve the objectives of what the fund was established to do? Does your idea clearly contribute to the themes that are outlined within the eligibility criteria or the proposal submission guide, whatever that might be? How much what we're calling stretching do you have to do to make your idea fit within a theme? The more convincing you feel you have to do, the harder it will be to put your proposal together. The best ideas are matched with the right fund where there's a clear alignment and there's no difficulty in answering those questions. So you should focus your proposal in the theme and the locations where you have the most experience, where you might already have some existing relationships, and where those ideas align with local needs for where the project will be delivered. All of that being said, of course, you're encouraged to look beyond mainstream and conventional partners to those that might be traditionally underrepresented. And so that might mean rethinking who your partners are in that project, but we'll speak to more on that later. Another thing you need to think about is, do you or your organization clearly fall within the fund's stated eligibility requirements? Do you need to have any documentations to demonstrate that eligibility? And be aware of what documentation you might need and be prepared to collect that, scan it digitally, as that might be required to be also submitted. The relevance really is of a particular initiative or project refers to its merit in terms of the needs it addresses for the recipients of the work and who will benefit from that. Within this building block, you really need to be able to describe why the need addressed by the proposal is important and demonstrate that it is highly valued by the local beneficiaries. So it's not just a good idea because your organization thinks it's a good idea, but the people who will ultimately benefit from the idea also really want this to happen. Ultimately, within this building block of relevance, you need to be able to succinctly describe the need addressed by a project, its importance, what will be done to meet that need, by whom, and who will benefit from the project outcomes. This is really, you may have heard this phrase, like the elevator pitch of your project. You should be able to describe that relevance within the time it takes to ride from the ground floor of a building to an upper floor. The next building block then is around results and outcomes. And part of thinking about relevance in that first step is thinking about how the results of your project and the outcomes of the project will help to contribute to the fund's mandate. And there are a few concepts to consider when thinking about results and outcomes. The first are outputs. And outputs are achieved after implementing a given activity or a given project. They aren't the reason for designing the project. They're not the reason you're submitting this fund, but rather they are the means to an end. And together, this set of outputs contributes to achieving a larger outcome. And typically, outputs can be measured in numbers. So let's say that, I'm putting together a project centered around health promotion. The outputs of that project around, promoting healthy communities, for example, could be the number of participants in a workshop on healthy living for seniors. It could be the number of community awareness meetings we have around, healthy lifestyles. So those you can see can be quantitatively measured and speak to the means to an end. Those workshops themselves don't result in a long-term change. Outcomes then are the differences made by the collection of outputs. They are not achieved right after the implementation of an activity or a project. And outcomes can be viewed as the end results. They are what you are striving to achieve through your proposed idea. So using that same health promotion project examples, the outcomes could be increase in knowledge among community members about healthy living, decreased incidences of hospitalizations or doctor's visits. You can see the difference then between the outputs is very tangible, the number of people at an event, and the outcome is the end state that we're leading towards. So what I just presented refers to results outcomes. The other element of this building block is related to managing risk. In developing your idea, have you thought about the possible risks related to the delivery of your project? You should be able to define the major risks that may affect the achievement of your expected results, the likelihood that that risk can happen, and a summary of the strategies that you might enact to respond to those risks. So risks can be operational, so something about staff allocations, information management, the reliability of vendors and suppliers that you might have. They can be financial, so compliance with different financial agreements, legal implications, wrongdoing. They could be reputational, so a reduction in confidence among the participants in your project or the beneficiaries of your project. Using our health promotion project example, possible risks could include that people don't attend your community events or your community workshops. And a way you might address these are by providing invitations in multiple languages, providing sessions at different times of day, providing sessions with childcare available. So you can see you've laid out the risk that could happen. People won't attend your workshop, and then your interventions for how you might address those risks before they become a challenge for you. In developing your various proposals, you need to make sure that you have adequately identified some of the larger risks, as well as those strategies to mitigate them. And throughout your proposal, you should also think about how you will set up a process to transparently document any lessons learned. And those are both positive and negative, as most funders want to know that the investment that they're making in your project can be leveraged indirectly to benefit groups beyond the intended beneficiaries. So outlining a commitment to doing this is an important aspect of results sharing. So in terms of measuring progress, such as those lessons learned, your proposal should really outline the internal processes you'll have in place to monitor progress and those risks. And this will need to contain information on any baselines, any targets that you might have, and any responsibilities that you'll need to build into your work plans related to data collection. Now, the third building block is around planning and project design. The results and outcomes that you will identify need a sound project design and project plan in order to be achieved. And a proposal needs to include that critical path outlining the sequencing and the schedule activities and various benchmarks that will be undertaken to achieve the desired results. At a high level, you'll need to make sure that your approach is tailored to a local context, aligns with best practices within the sector or the community, incorporates any lessons learned and lived experience as appropriate, and takes into account the broader community context within which your project is being situated. Now, there are many schools of thoughts as to how this can be expressed. You can do this through a narrative description of phases and tasks. You can do this through a series of bullets, or you can do it through some sort of combination. But irrespective of how you do that, there are certain elements that need to be included. You need to include broad level phases, which are a collection of tasks. So they could be around initiating your project. They could be around design training or then delivering training. But each phase should directly speak to how it contributes to the objective of your proposal. Then there are collections of tasks and subtasks, and these are the activities, the work that you'll do within those phases to actually deliver on the project. Now, ultimately, both those phases and tasks need to be tied to timeframes. Projects need to be delivered within a certain established length of time. And you'll need to understand how the tasks nest and relate to each other, where an activity needs to be fully completed before the next one can begin. This type of work those timeframes need to be conscious of broader requirements, and the conscious of the seasons with which they fall, for example. So if the fund that you're applying to requires that all projects need to be completed within 12 months, and your project idea is to plant gardens or do restoration along a creek bed or something, you'll need to make sure that the timing of your planting activities falls within a weather cycle where that is possible. Will the ground be frozen? Will it be too wet and rainy? Will it be too hot and the plants will dry out? So it's important that timing is both relevant to the funder and their requirements, but also the physical or natural limitations to completing that task. Lastly, you also need to think about how your activities relate to one another. And this is what I was speaking to before, but how one task may rely on another one and how those interdependencies can play out. That can also be part of your risk mitigation. The last component of planning and project design is the budget. And this is the ever important financial plan for your project. And here is where it is vitally important that you consult the guidance that the fund you are applying to provides. Are all the costs you're planning for eligible within the fund? Can they all be expensed against it? Do you have to make any matching contributions, either cash or in kind? And how does the fund want that budget broken down? The last piece I would say as well is, have you demonstrated that you are using that budget you've allocated effectively? Does your project approach yield good value for money? Are you achieving any economies of scale in your delivery? Are you maximizing financial resources? I hope now you can start to see, as we're in this third building block, how by having adequate answers to all these questions, you're really teeing yourself up for that competitive process of being compared to the other applications submitted around yours. So then the fourth building block is around partnerships and collaboration. Big challenges need broad coalitions. And many funds, particularly ones that address systemic or so-called wicked problems, require collaboration and partnerships. And there are a variety of ways to collaborate and engage, ranging from just informing local communities to full-scale equitable partnerships. And you'll need to determine the degree to which you want to collaborate. When thinking about local partners, there's a few things that are important to consider. So including underrepresented versus working with only mainstream organizations. What are partners' roles going to be? Are they equitable? Does everyone contribute to decisions? How is attribution and authorship being considered? Do all contributors and all partners have attribution in project materials and reports? How are budgets allocated? Are you considering the value, from a financial sense, of contributions from local partners and community members? Or are you getting funded for your work, but their time is voluntary? All of these things need to be thought about in terms of establishing those partnerships and collaboration contexts. In terms of community engagement, so not partnerships to deliver your project idea, but engagement with any groups or beneficiaries of your project idea. First off, have you built this sufficiently into your project design? Or are you leaving it as an afterthought of something you'll do if you're successful? For example, if your idea is to promote outdoor winter participation in a community, have you planned to talk to community members about what is holding them back from participating in winter outdoor activities? What would they like to see in their community in winter months? So your project history then has to consider local context, local wants, cultural history, the impact that your idea will have on the local community. It has to consider that key stakeholders, so that's local authorities or other levels of government or key community groups, support the project and its relevance locally. And it needs to be really conscious of the legacy of your project moving forward beyond the time in which you will be involved. And that brings us to my last building block that I'll speak about, which is around sustainability. So on that note of the legacy of your project moving forward, beyond the time frame in which you are delivering it, this building block really refers to how you see your project idea sustaining itself when funding support ends. While I absolutely acknowledge that sustainable results often depend on continued availability of human, financial, or physical resources, Your proposal to any funder should include some sort of strategy that can demonstrate how these resources will be sustained after the project is, formally wrapped up and completed. And I suppose there's some instances, but I would imagine they're quite rare, why that is not necessary. So one element of idea sustainability is local ownership for the project concept. Does the idea respond to the needs, priorities, and approaches identified by the local community? And that really builds on that community engagement piece, as I was previously talking about. And if it does, can that local community sustain the project once your involvement in it wraps up? Fundamentally, it means that local partners and community members believe in the project to such a great degree that they're willing to take responsibility for its success into the long term. This ownership is often really dependent on the capacity of local partners and participants to eventually assume responsibility to maintain the project functioning and that long-term outcomes are achieved. And your proposal should speak to the project's long-term objectives to improve or reframe skills and capacities within the local community. And there's different ways to build that capacity. You can offer opportunities for learning by doing throughout the project. You can offer training and technical assistance. You can offer opportunities for networking and knowledge exchange, investments in building up community support and organizing community, and the development of specific resources and tools to raise capacity. So now that I've gone over these large theoretical building blocks, I'll hand it over to my colleague and friend, Megan, who can speak to some of the practicalities of doing all of this when faced with a proposal submission deadline, which is no small feat. Megan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Eva. So you've got to move your idea that's in your head and maybe share it amongst some of your team into a proposal that can be submitted and evaluated by people who don't have this window into your mind. And you need to make it clear to others. The place that I like to start is in building a project work plan. My friends tell me I'm nothing if not practical. So this makes total sense if you know me. Sometimes this is called a workflow or a Gantt chart, or I think Eva called it a project schedule at one point. You can use really complex software tools, or you can just use simple spreadsheets. You're going to work with whatever is your preference, what you're comfortable with, or what's like standard in your organization. I like to start by itemizing just the key phases, tasks, and deliverables. Like literally write them down in a spreadsheet in order that you think they'll occur. They're going to look different in every project, but there's likely, some kind of launch process or inception phase where all the parties are agreeing on the finalization of the work plan. There's likely a design element, an implementation element, maybe a review and revise phase, and then some conclusions and lessons learned, maybe some dissemination. You're going to establish a timeline and dependencies, lay out each week or each month, and imagine when tasks will occur. Are key tasks maybe falling over major holidays or seasons? You want to note where you have dependencies and where you don't. Some delays are going to cause a domino effect, and others won't. They might be able to run concurrently to other things. You can schedule those key meetings. Some of them might be flexible. Some might require long lead ups and preparations. Others might have to be booked well in advance. You're going to weave in your contingencies. We have a tendency in proposal writing to show a best case scenario. That's not always helpful to anyone. We should be prepared for reality in these projects and weave in what reality will look like, anticipate some of those problems. And then allocate staff time and resources. Literally estimate how many hours or days per task or per person you envision. This can really help you calculate your budget. You can tally up your total hours or days. You can figure out if you're using day rates or salaries. You can estimate your hard costs. You can figure out how you're going to deal with taxes. And doing this, you can see how your budget breaks down, maybe per person or per task or per phase or per fiscal year, whatever way you want to look at it. I find even if a funder isn't asking you to present a Gantt chart or a workflow or a project schedule, it's still highly valuable. It gives you a lot of information about the whole project in one concise chart. Maybe you want to pull out just the timeline or the budget for aspects of your proposal write-up, and you can hide cells and pull from this master chart. What you end up doing here is avoiding the creation of like conflicting copies of information. And that can be really helpful as more and more people start to get involved in the proposal development. So if you could just switch to the next slide for me. I'd like to talk a little bit about the common pitfalls and hurdles we see. So Evan and I didn't tell you much about us. We work for this nonprofit organization called ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. We're a network of cities that are committed to sustainability. And we've each been working here for about 20 years. Fundraising is a big part of our jobs. A rough napkin level estimation I've made is we probably write 12 proposals a year. That's a modest estimate. Over 20 years, that's 240 total. And then of course, we're partners in many other proposals. And from time to time, we find ourselves on evaluation committees for funds. Full disclosure, we're not on any sort of evaluation committee for this Chi-Chi proposal. So that's where we're drawing these kind of common pitfalls and hurdles. The first is around fit. Is this the appropriate fund to bring your project to? Or are you maybe trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? I often see organizations want to shop around an idea for a project to a variety of funders. And really rarely does that work when you're dealing with a specific call for proposals that has a specific set of objectives. It might work if you have relationships with foundations that want to support the good work you do and want to hear, these ideas that you're bringing forward. But when you're responding to a call for proposals with these very specific objectives, you want to make sure that that's the kind of project you're bringing forward. So check yourself, ask yourself this question. Am I trying to get my pre-designed project funded, or am I trying to design a project to fit the funder's needs? And these are very different things. You're going to have more success with the latter. If this fund says it's for addressing COVID impacts, you need to make sure you'll explain how your project will do that. A lot of folks go to funds, very specific funds with requests for core funding support. And I don't generally see that being a successful approach. Another one is around common pitfall is around eligibility. So a lot of times we have questions around what organizations are really eligible. Most funds or calls are very, very, very particular about this. So what kind of legal entity are you? Sometimes people working at your organization or in partnership with you don't know this. It's not necessarily common knowledge. And as an example, like a charity and a nonprofit are not the same thing in Canada. And if maybe your organization spans the US and Canada border, the definitions of those things are very different in different countries. So really pay attention to this before you invest too much time or effort. Eligibility criteria they're really black and white. You can't talk your way into changing them. No amount of like salesmanship or wishful thinking is going to change the eligibility criteria. So really make sure you understand that. Another common pitfall, it's kind of a funny one, but just around the title that you apply to your project. Think of the many ways your title is going to be used and who will be using it. And apply one that can be used kind of beyond the application period, but well into the implementation and hopefully long life of the project. I've seen some projects kind of haunted by an old title that seemed fitting at the time, but didn't really make a lot of sense in the long run. And like your title is your first opportunity to really grab the attention of your potential funder. So use that opportunity well. Another one is around project importance or just the need for the project. Often folks will jump in with what they think is a great idea without really demonstrating the need for it. Just because you can, you need to define, should you? Has something like this already been done? Maybe by another organization? How is what you are doing different? How will it lead to different results? Funders, they want to fund something new and innovative that builds on knowledge and past experience. So demonstrate that you have some knowledge of the field you're in and have some opinions about the direction it needs to go and how your project is going to take it there. Evan touched on this as well. Engagement with the community. I see a lack of meaningful connection to the communities and collaborators as a common problem. And sometimes this one really pains me. Projects that try to serve a community, but not done in collaboration with the community. This should be formalized. It's not speculative. In each of the partners' voice. Make it very clear in the work plan who is doing what budget allocation there is to support engagement. And budget should represent the full cost of a project. The partners aren't necessarily just there to provide in-kind support to your project. Make sure it represents both. And this kind of links to the next common pitfall or hurdle, which is around leadership or a lack of a decision-making framework around the collaborators. How will decisions be made? How will conflict be resolved? Who's ultimately responsible? Who holds liability? Thinking through this at the conceptualization stage really serves the partners well in defining their relationship. And it also shows that the funder can trust that you have solid relationships that aren't necessarily or that aren't likely going to go south over like disagreements within this project. And that links a bit to risk management. I'm kind of surprised sometimes when I see how little attention this one gets. Think through some of the obstacles you may face and identify strategies to overcome them. Write these in the proposal. What will you do about staff turnover, volunteer burnout, or whatever obstacles your project might face? This demonstrates your experience in the field, your expertise, your professionalism. It's not like the absence of obstacles that you want to demonstrate, but resilience and the ability to overcome them that you want to demonstrate. Measuring and reporting progress is another common pitfall. A lack of a clear picture of what success looks like. How will you measure whether you've achieved it? Using qualitative and quantitative indicators. And show the process for gathering this information in your work plan. It's a task that actually needs to be done. It doesn't just sort of happen magically alongside your project, right? Gathering that information is a key task. So think about how you'll gather that. And then budget, including ineligible expenditures, I see happen a lot. Ensure you're only including the eligible expenditures. This is just as particular as that eligibility criteria. So go through the budget requirements with a fine-tooth comb. It's a very specialized skill. And if you have finance people in your organization, I highly recommend you engage them in this. Sometimes, they're not engaged till after a project starts or not in the conceptualization stage, but I think they can be really valuable contributors to that budget development process. Eva, do you mind advancing? Yes. So, a few general tips and tricks. First, review all the guidance material available to you before you start writing. There's usually a few pieces available, right? Beyond just the application form. We have this common tendency to just jump in and start writing. And we end up addressing what we consider as priority points, sometimes even in the wrong sections of the proposal. When you're dealing with, proposal forms that have word limits, and evaluators, you need to address priorities where they're prompted. And you might notice things in the evaluation criteria that aren't specifically prompted for in the application. So you want to weave those into your answers to the key questions. And sometimes you'll even find inconsistencies in the various materials available to support your application. They're prepared by humans too. So this gives you an opportunity to seek some clarification. You want to organize what elements you'll cover in which section of the proposal. You can't fit everything into that first outline, so pace yourself. And like when I say review all the guidance materials before writing, if this fund has multiple calls over time, review what's been funded already. If there's information about that, there's tremendous insights to be found within the summaries of past projects, how they've addressed the criteria, how they've found relevance. So make sure you take a look at some of that. You want to confirm your partner relationships in writing. Saying that you have a partnership is not showing that you have a partnership. So let the partners speak for themselves in their own voice with their own signature. Request those letters of support early to allow for sign-off periods. Sometimes, sign-off on a letter is a high-level decision in an organization. It can take weeks, so start it earlier. This might mean, you have to request the letter of support before the whole proposal is written. So, write a quick summary first so they know, they have a sense of what you're asking them for, and then can collaborate on the next steps. I would say leave time for review by your collaborators. Have someone who's not familiar with the proposal review it for clarity and style. If you're like me, you read the same thing over and over again and you stop seeing your own mistakes. So put someone in the shoes of the evaluator. Read it with fresh eyes. And then leave plenty of time for uploading and editing. You'll often work, I always work in a word processor to prepare my responses. Leave plenty of time for uploading and editing. Online submission forms are always finicky. Do they work in your browser? Are the character limits what you expect them to be? I know of many missed deadlines due to technical difficulties or internet problems. You don't want to see all your hard work lost there. In fact, I've seen online systems crash on the day a proposal is due. So, save yourself the stress and get out ahead of it. I don't want to see any hearts broken or tears shed over missed deadlines. I've had a few of those of my own, and I don't want to see them going forward. So next slide, Eva. So these are the keywords resources you have at your disposal. A lot of the questions folks have or had in our past webinar could be addressed in some of these keyword resources. So take the time to comb through them all. You've got the application form, the application guide, the equity guidance, which is a prompt for important front-end considerations for equitable partnerships and programming and community engagement. You've got the evaluation criteria there. You've got the glossary, the budget template. You've also got like the intermediary agreement, the application screencast, the launch event recording, the online application portal. You've got so much available to you, including all these community mobilization sessions. So take advantage of them all. Many answers to the questions you have are already within these documents. I would just say that staff managing funds, they do get a lot of questions, and you're not necessarily going to be able to get your questions asked really quickly, but you might be able to find them right in those materials. So take advantage of that. And I think that brings me pretty close to the ending. Rupal is going to facilitate a Q&A, but I just want to say good luck. I hope these 5 building blocks and the various tips and tricks we've provided here will help you shape your great ideas into winning proposals. Maybe you're a first-time applicant, or maybe you're a repeat applicant, but I think I just want to wish you all the best of luck and hand it over to Rupal for our Q&A.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. That was so comprehensive, and I've already seen some really positive comments in the chat about the value and the quality of the information that's been shared. I want to facilitate a quick Q&A. Some really great questions came through the chat, and I know that some were addressed, but there are some that are a bit more general that I think are really interesting. One in particular that I will start with is about results and evaluation and reporting. And I know that I'm asking you a very general question and that different funding programs will have different rules around this, but let's say a funding program you're applying to doesn't allow you to include the expenses for evaluation in that program. What's some advice you might give somebody who wants to make sure that they're not being unfairly compensated for the time it takes to do some of that work?
My initial suggestion, and Megan, obviously please add, would be to build it into an event you're having. So for example, if you're going to coordinate a event in a park, something as simple as counting the number of participants is a method of reporting on a result, right? You organize this event in a public park. You could ask people to sign in to get a number. You could ask them to complete a simple questionnaire, their preferred gender pronouns, so you can get a sense of, the gender balance at this event. You could ask whether they identify as a minority group to get a sense of how much you're bringing underrepresented groups. There's really simple things you could do that don't require additional budget that if you put that into your proposal, will give the funder a sense of, oh, they're willing to do this as part of their project design, as opposed to, hiring an external project evaluator who may do a much more robust analysis, but it may or may not be an eligible cost. So I think about where you can build it into something you're already doing that can speak to some of the results you're achieving through your various activities. So if you're doing, I saw somebody comment about paddling trips somewhere or paddling activities, how many people participated, how many people under 18 years of age participated, between 20 and 50, over 50. So you're already showing by just collecting some really simple data that you have, you're acknowledging your results are being achieved through something you're already doing.
And I just add that,
yeah,
I was just going to add that sometimes, funders, if you have the capacity to provide some in-kind support to a project, from your own organizational resources, some funders will see that as great added value, right? Like they're providing a certain amount of funding for the project, but then there's this additional kind of in-kind support, either from your organization or from another partner that wants to be involved. And sometimes you might be able to sort of build some of those evaluation components into that, in that it serves not just your project, but the broader mission and mandate of your organization, and that with that you could sort of justify bringing it to the table as an offering to the broader project.
And a related question that came in that I think a lot of folks would love some advice on is, considering how many different programs there are out there, how many different application forms there are to fill out, how would you to individually weigh all of the factors around your time, the mandate of your organization, the likelihood of success, to prioritize what you will apply for and what you won't?
I was typing up an answer, but then I was like, no, I want to talk about this question because this is something Megan and I do all the time. And to me, there's 3 pillars you need to balance. You need to balance the amount of money you're asking for relative to your organization, because obviously that amount, $250,000 to one organization is like 5 years of budget, to another it's one project. The amount of time it's going to take you to put it together, and then your likelihood for success. To me, that's the ratio you need to balance in order to decide whether you're going to apply or not. And that time thing, I mean, I can't answer. I can't answer that, well, don't take any more than 6 hours to put this together, or don't take any more than 60 hours to put this together. Like it depends. And I know, Megan, you and I have different thresholds for how much time we'll invest into things. But I think you really need to balance those 3 things together. If you're asking for what would be a year's worth of funding for your organization, obviously put in more time. But if you're asking for what covers, maybe only 3 months of staff time, maybe that doesn't need as much of an investment in terms of your proposal writing.
Yeah, I'd say that you do want to have that conversation before you jump in. Like, is this the right fund for us? Do we think there's any kind of likelihood we'd be successful at it? I don't think we can give you terms around that, but if you're saying yes to everything that comes to you across your table, you probably don't have a strict enough of a filter. Right. You do want to have a process of deciding yes or no to go forward or something. No organization has the capacity to go for them all. And I can't imagine everyone's fit would be quite perfect, right? So have that conversation amongst the kind of the decision makers in your organization, and make sure you're not saying yes every single time.
Right. And as you're doing that work, kind of researching the different opportunities and trying to figure out who else might be applying, somebody in the chat, I think, put it as, how do you find out who the competition is? Which I'm not sure I would put it quite like that, but what are the creative ways that somebody can go about finding that information and understanding the context that they're applying to, if that information isn't, readily available?
I ask myself that question all the time. I say competition too. It sucks, but it is. And there's 2 things that come to mind that are really helpful for me when I have that conversation. One is professional networks, right? Like, if you're in a professional network, ask around. I do that all the time. And, people want to kind of share their experiences with them. So if you're in a community of practice, if you're part of a professional network that has a way of connecting, do it that way. And sorry, what was my number 2? Can't see. Oh, if it's a fund that runs on a regular cycle, study who's received funds before. You can get a sense of the project size, the organizational size, the capacity, all those sorts of things. I find that almost like the richest area, because you can understand how eligibility and criteria then end up in project delivery, right? You can see how all of the expectations around the fund were interpreted and how the projects were interpreting the criteria of the fund. So that's really, really helpful information.
I can tell just from looking through the chat that we've got some very new people to proposal writing, and then we've also got people who have been through these cycles of funding before and have been through the kind of the ebbs and flows of it. I'm wondering what kind of advice you would give somebody who's maybe putting together a proposal for the first time and might be worried that rather than filling it out themselves, they should hire someone to do it. Maybe they're not confident about their more formal writing style, and they're not sure what would be best for their organization, right? To have themselves do it or an outside person.
I think one of the keys with this is not to lose confidence, even though you may not write these types of proposals all the time, but to kind of really, put your chin up that you're the expert on your project. You're the expert on why it's a good idea. You're the expert on what you want to achieve. And you're the expert in the innovations of what you want to do. The key is to then read through all the documentation provided by the fund to which you're applying to merge those two things together. And I personally, I wouldn't worry about writing it in, an academic tone or style, or in the style of a marketing agency, but to really present the facts and the passion you have for the idea that's bringing you to apply in the first place. I think we can all agree, and as Megan and I were saying, these are competitive processes, and those often those that are successful are the ones that are able to do that, to really take the passion for why they really believe in this idea and marry it with what the fund wants to achieve. And so I think really focusing in on that, and not necessarily, and if you have the budget, absolutely, feel free to engage somebody in that, but that person won't have as much passion for the idea as you do. So you're still going to have to do some work to get that across. I would worry less about, obviously beyond simple grammatical errors and things like that, make sure your idea gets across. And I think Megan's tip about having somebody, it could be your cousin or your neighbor, review it, who has no idea about your project. And if it makes sense to them and gets them excited, you're obviously on the right track.
I've had some experience where funds require like creating logic models and theories of change and performance frameworks. And I find those are very like specialized components of grant writing. And the process through which they're developed is very important to some granting organizations, particularly in like international development. So like, if you're finding that that's the level of requirement that a fund is asking for, it's tough to write that if you don't have experience in it or training in it. So I think you have to sort of weigh what the fund is asking for and whether or not you have the kind of skills and ability to do it. And if you don't feel you do, there are organizations that are out there that exist to help support these things. So lean on them when you kind of feel it's appropriate. But if your sense is you can tackle this with your own internal capacity or the support mechanisms that you can lean on, then I say go for it.
I am going to make an assumption that both of you have been on many different panels or juries or assessment meetings and have read hundreds or maybe thousands of grant applications and funding applications. And I'm wondering if you could identify maybe one thing that you learned in your early days from being on one of those panels that helped you as a proposal writer or a grant writer, and maybe even a pitfall or a mistake that you see people make that they don't realize they're making, but when you read the application in that meeting room, people notice it.
I think it'll be a pitfall that I'm guilty of, not even that I've read, which is assuming everyone understands what I'm talking about because it's clear in my head. And I think, to me, and that particularly is relevant to connecting your idea to eligibility criteria. It may be an obvious connection to you, a thick, bold line that connects, I want to do this health promotion activity with this fund. It could be a climate change fund, for example. And it's really clear to you how those things are related, but it needs to be clear to that reviewer who may or may not be a specialist in climate change and health. I'm totally grasping at straws for an example here, but to make that connection as clear as possible to a lay reader. It might be somebody who's a very experienced funder, but they're not a subject matter specialist. So you need to make sure that your expertise as a subject matter or a community specialist is coming across to somebody who doesn't necessarily use the same terms you do. So I would avoid using highly technical and nuanced terms that are clear to you as an expert, but put the more simple version of that term for someone like me to understand who may not work in that space day to day. So that would be my pitfall. Megan?
I think that evaluation committees, they want to fund so much more than they're able to, right? Like, these things are always oversubscribed. And so they're faced with really hard decisions. And if there is an opportunity, I don't take a sort of lack of success on your first try as a complete fail. If there's an opportunity to resubmit, maybe refine and tweak some areas of your proposal, I would suggest doing that, because when a fund is new and shiny and everyone applies, okay, they're oversubscribed to a certain degree. And then if there are future calls, then you might have an opportunity to get funded through that one. So don't take the first kind of decline as a sign that the idea is no good. Right? They had to make decisions. Maybe they were looking for a certain amount of geographical spread or representation, and they were facing tough decisions there. But it doesn't mean it couldn't go through on the next round. So I'd encourage folks to think about that.
And then, Rupal, you asked, the first part of the question was around kind of what we've seen that's really successful. And for me, it's the ones that go beyond the bare minimum of what's asked, and so maybe you don't need a letter of support, but if you can put a quote from somebody in the community that says, this project would be so helpful to me as a local farmer or gardener or someone who's underhoused. This would be such a valuable thing to me. I think those little things that maybe not spelled out as you must do this, but that can help show how your innovative idea meets their eligibility criteria are the things that you want to get. And maybe that'll be in the form of a letter of support like Megan talked about, or maybe it'll be in the form of a quote from someone in the community, or maybe it'll be in the form of a collection of photographs or something. Try not to let yourself get limited by, okay, these are the 12 things I have to have. I'm going to have 12 things in my proposal, but really think about how you're going to make that connection between what the fund wants and what you want to do. And that may not be necessarily just the 12 bullet points that are there. Which I guess at the same time I need to say, but don't get overwhelmed by that, because it can seem overwhelming, and just tackle it. It'll feel like a marathon, but it has mile markers, and just get through those mile markers. Every day you're going to work on a little bit more, and that's how you're going to get those 26 miles done together.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. I see there is an onslaught of questions coming through the chat. So I just want to remind everybody who's listening, any questions that you have about this program, the email address for the help desk at Healthy Communities Initiative has been put into the chat several times by my colleagues. Please, please, please email that help desk and get the information that you need. Thank you so much to Megan and Eva for giving us all of this amazing information. I do wish we had more time with you, but there is one more community mobilization session coming up this Thursday, June 10th, hosted by Vivon Veal. That will be offered in French, obviously with English translation as well for those of us who don't speak French. So please, if you have other questions or you want to attend another one of these sessions, please come. Thank you so much for joining us. There's a really quick poll that my colleague Jamie is going to throw up to get your quick thoughts about how you found this session. I want to thank Megan and Eva once again, our partners and CFC, and encourage everyone who's interested to apply for this program. And it is 3 o'clock, so we'll wrap it up and hopefully see everybody back here on Thursday. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ripple. Bye.